Nora Everly shoved the storm shelter door shut behind her and froze. The man rising from the corner bench was not the kind you hope to meet alone in a blizzard. His hand hovered near his revolver, and his eyes held the sort of stillness that came before violence. She pressed her back against the cold planks, snow melting into her coat collar, her breath visible in the dim lantern glow. He did not move. Neither did she. Outside, the wind screamed across the plains like something dying. Inside, the silence stretched too thin. She had run from the storm. Now she wondered if she had run straight into something worse. Hollis Cutter lowered his hand from the gun, but kept his weight balanced, ready. The woman in the doorway looked like trouble. The kind that wore a respectable dress and carried a leather satchel. Her auburn hair was pinned up against the wind, and her face held that mix of fear and defiance he had learned not to trust. He did not recognize her, which meant she was either new to Blue Mesa or passing through. Either way, she had just trapped them both in 8 feet of cramped shelter, with a storm that could last hours. He nodded once toward the bench opposite. "Take a seat if you want, but keep your hands where I can see them." Nora did not sit. She studied him, cataloging every detail the way she had trained herself to do. Freight foreman, if the dust on his boots and the calluses on his hands meant anything. Dangerous, if the way he moved meant anything. She kept her voice steady. "I am the editor of the Blue Mesa Gazette. I was coming back from the Hargrove homestead when the storm hit. I saw the light." She paused, then added the things she knew mattered. "I am not armed." Hollis almost smiled. Almost. A newspaper editor. That explained the satchel and the way she watched him like she was taking notes for a story. He relaxed his shoulders but kept his eyes on her hands. "Hollis Cutter. I work freight out of the railhead. I was checking supply lines when the sky turned." He gestured again toward the bench. "Sit down before you fall down. You look half frozen." She moved carefully, taking the bench across from him, setting the satchel beside her feet. The shelter was barely large enough for 2 people, and the proximity made her pulse kick hard. She could smell wood smoke and leather, and the cold outside still clinging to his coat. Her father had taught her never to trust a man who looked comfortable with a gun. Hollis Cutter looked more than comfortable. He looked like he had been born wearing one. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "How long do these storms usually last?" Hollis shrugged. "Could be an hour. Could be 6. Depends on the wind." He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable stillness. "You should not have been out alone. This country does not forgive mistakes." His tone was not unkind, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen too many people learn that lesson the hard way. Nora straightened her spine. "I was doing my job. The Hargroves are facing foreclosure. Someone has to tell their story." She watched his expression shift, just slightly, and knew she had surprised him. People always underestimated a woman with a printing press. Let them. She had learned to use that to her advantage. Hollis studied her more carefully now. The Hargroves. He knew the name. Good people. Hard-working. The kind the territory was supposed to protect, not crush. He uncrossed his arms. "What happened?" Nora hesitated. Trust was not something she gave easily. Not after what her father had done. Not after the way her family had looked at her when she refused to marry the man they chose. But something in Hollis Cutter's face made her want to answer. Maybe it was the way he had said the country does not forgive mistakes, like he knew that truth from the inside. She pulled a folded paper from her satchel. The bank is calling in their loan early. They claim the Hargroves missed a payment, but the family has receipts proving otherwise. Someone is lying, and I intend to find out who. Hollis took the paper she offered, unfolding it carefully. His jaw tightened as he read. First National. That meant Carson Webb, the banker who had been tightening his grip on Blue Mesa for the past 2 years. Hollis had his own reasons to distrust Webb. Reasons that had nothing to do with foreclosures, and everything to do with a shipment that had gone missing last fall. He handed the paper back. Webb is dirty. Everyone knows it. But knowing it and proving it are different things. He met her eyes. You are playing a dangerous game. Nora folded the paper and returned it to her satchel. I know. But someone has to. She paused, then added quietly, My father taught me that the truth matters more than safety. She did not add that her father had also taught her that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that one mistake could cost you everything. Those lessons had cut deeper. Hollis heard the crack in her voice, small but real. He knew that sound. He had made it himself more times than he could count, back when he still thought he could outrun his past. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What are you not telling me? Nora looked up sharply. Excuse me? Hollis kept his tone even. You are holding something back. I can see it. If you want to take down Webb, you are going to need help. But I am not walking into a fight blind. So what is it? Nora felt her heartbeat in her throat. She had not planned to tell anyone. The papers in her satchel were stolen, taken from Webb's office 3 nights ago, when she had slipped in through the back door after the clerks went home. She had told herself it was journalism, that exposing corruption justified the risk. But the law would not see it that way. The law would see theft. She looked at Hollis Cutter and made a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff. I have documents from Webb's files. Loan records. Ledger pages. Enough to prove he has been altering payment dates and forging signatures. She paused. I did not exactly ask permission to take them. Hollis sat back slowly. So you broke into his office. His voice was flat, unreadable. Nora lifted her chin. Yes. And if you are thinking about turning me in, you should know I will publish everything I found before they lock me up. Webb will go down either way. Hollis shook his head, and then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a low, rough sound, but genuine. You have more spine than sense. He sobered. I am not turning you in. But you just made yourself the most wanted woman in Blue Mesa. Webb is not going to let this go. He will come after you with everything he has. She met his eyes. Then I will be ready. But her hands were shaking, and they both knew it. Hollis saw the tremor she tried to hide. He recognized it. The moment when bravado met reality, and you realized you were in deeper than you planned. He had been there. Hell. He was still there. He had his own stolen papers. Documents he had taken from a freight office 6 months ago that proved Webb had been redirecting territorial funds. He had been sitting on them, waiting for the right moment, afraid that using them would bring the wrong kind of attention, afraid that people would ask questions he did not want to answer. He rubbed his jaw, feeling the scrape of his short beard. You are going to need somewhere safe to stay. Webb has half the town in his pocket. If he knows you have those papers, he will send someone. Nora had not thought that far ahead. She had been so focused on getting the evidence that she had not planned what came after. The Gazette office had a back room, but it was no fortress. Her boarding house room had a lock that a child could pick. She looked at Hollis. "What are you suggesting?" Hollis knew he was about to make a mistake. But he also knew that walking away would be a bigger one. There is a ranch outside town. Bluebird Ranch. It belonged to a friend of mine. She passed last year, and the place has been sitting empty. It is remote, defensible. No one would think to look there. He paused. You could use it until this blows over. She stared at him. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Hollis met her gaze and told her the simplest truth he could manage. Because Webb needs to go down. And because you remind me of someone who tried to fight him alone and lost. He did not say that the someone was himself, that he had watched his freight business crumble under Webb's pressure, that he had spent the last year rebuilding from nothing. He did not say that he recognized her fear because it mirrored his own. He just waited. Nora made her decision. She extended her hand across the narrow space between them. All right. Partners. Until Webb is finished. Hollis took her hand. Her grip was firm, and her palm was cold from the storm outside. He felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly. More like the possibility of hope. He released her hand slowly. Partners. The wind hammered the shelter door, and the lantern flickered. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something unexpected had begun. They waited out the storm in careful silence, the kind that felt less like distrust and more like two people learning the shape of each other's presence. Nora pulled a small notebook from her satchel and began writing, her handwriting neat and quick. Hollis watched her without trying to hide it. She had the kind of focus that shut out everything else, the way she bent over the page, the way her lips moved slightly as she worked through a thought. It reminded him of his sister, back before the fever took her. That same stubborn determination to make the world make sense. When the wind finally eased and the gray light outside turned softer, Hollis stood and pushed the door open. Snow had drifted against the threshold, but the worst had passed. He turned back. Ready? Nora closed her notebook and stood, pulling her coat tighter. As ready as I will ever be. They stepped out into a world transformed. The plains stretched white and silent under a sky that was still heavy but no longer violent. Blue Mesa was 2 miles south, a smudge of buildings against the pale horizon. Hollis nodded toward the west. Bluebird Ranch is that way. We can make it before dark if we move steady. She followed him into the snow, and neither of them looked back. They walked in silence for the first mile, boots crunching through fresh powder, breath steaming. Nora kept pace beside him, and Hollis found himself adjusting his stride to match hers without thinking about it. The cold bit through his coat, but the air was clean and sharp, the kind that cleared your head. He glanced sideways at her. You ever fire a gun? Nora looked at him. Yes. My father taught me. She did not say that she had not touched one since the day she left home, since the day he told her she was a disappointment and a fool for choosing a printing press over a husband. She did not say that she still dreamed about that conversation, still woke up with his voice in her head. Why? Hollis kept his eyes forward. Because if Webb figures out you have those papers, he will send someone who does not ask questions first. You need to be ready to defend yourself. His tone was matter-of-fact, but she heard the edge underneath. He was not trying to scare her. He was telling her the truth. She appreciated that more than comfort. They reached Bluebird Ranch as the sun dropped low, painting the snow gold and pink. The ranch was small, but solid. A single-story cabin with a barn and a corral that still held fence posts. Hollis pushed open the cabin door, and the hinges creaked. Inside, dust covered everything, but the structure was sound. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a narrow loft ran above the main room. Nora set her satchel on the table and looked around. "It is perfect. Thank you." Hollis shrugged. "I will get a fire going. You should rest." But she did not rest. She pulled out her papers and spread them across the table, her mind already working. Hollis watched her from the fireplace, feeding kindling into the growing flames. She was going to get herself killed, and he was going to help her do it. The thought should have bothered him more than it did. The fire caught and filled the cabin with warmth. Nora worked by lantern light, cross-referencing dates and signatures, building her case line by line. Hollis brought in wood from the barn and checked the perimeter, making sure no one had followed them. When he came back inside, she was frowning at a ledger page. "What is wrong?" She tapped the paper. "This payment date does not match the Hargroves receipt, but it also does not match Webb's usual pattern. Someone else altered this entry, someone who knew what they were doing." Hollis leaned over her shoulder to look. The proximity made his pulse kick, but he kept his focus on the page. Who else has access to those files? Nora traced the signature with one finger. The deputy, Samuel Gaines. She looked up at Hollis. If Gaines is involved, this is bigger than just Webb. The whole system is compromised. Hollis straightened. Gaines is the one who enforces foreclosures. If he is in on it, no one in Blue Mesa is safe. Nora closed her eyes. We need more proof. Something that ties them together. Hollis thought about the documents he had hidden back in his freight office. The ones that showed Webb's money moving through territorial accounts. He had been afraid to use them because they implicated people higher up. People who could make him disappear. But looking at Nora, seeing the way she refused to back down even when the odds were impossible, he felt something shift. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to fight. He made his choice. I have something that might help. But we need to go back to town. Tonight. Nora opened her eyes. That is too dangerous. If Webb knows I am missing, he will be watching. Hollis met her gaze. Then we make sure he does not see us. She held his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition that they were both in this now, all the way. She nodded. All right, let us go finish this. They rode into Blue Mesa under cover of full dark, using the back trails Hollis knew from his freight runs. The town was quiet, windows glowing with lamplight. The main street empty except for a few horses tied outside the saloon. Hollis led Nora through the alley behind the freight office, dismounting in the shadows. Stay here. Keep watch. If anyone comes, whistle twice. She nodded, and he disappeared inside. Nora stood in the cold, heart pounding. Every sound amplified. A dog barked somewhere. A door slammed. She counted her breaths, trying to stay calm. Then she heard boots on the boardwalk, slow and deliberate. She pressed herself against the wall and held still. Deputy Samuel Gaines walked past the alley entrance, lantern in hand, scanning the street. Nora did not breathe. He stopped, turned, looked straight at the alley. For a moment, she thought he saw her. Then he moved on, his footsteps fading toward the saloon. She exhaled slowly and whistled twice, low and sharp. Hollis emerged seconds later, a leather portfolio under his arm. He saw her face and knew. Gaines? She nodded. He was looking for something. Or someone. Hollis took her arm and pulled her toward the horses. We need to move. Now. They rode hard, cutting across open country, snow flying under the horses' hooves. Nora glanced back once and saw lanterns moving in the distance, a search party spreading out from town. Hollis saw them too, and urged his horse faster. They reached Bluebird Ranch just ahead of the pursuit, and dismounted in a rush. Hollis grabbed the portfolio and Nora's satchel. Inside, bar the door. They tumbled into the cabin, and Hollis slammed the heavy beam across the door brackets. Nora moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. How many? Hollis joined her, his shoulder against hers. 4 riders. Maybe 5. He checked his revolver, then handed her a rifle from the rack on the wall. You remember how to use this? She took it, hands steady. Yes. He believed her. The riders circled the cabin, keeping their distance. Hollis recognized Gaines in front, and 2 men he knew from Webb's bank. The 4th was a hired gun, a man named Rourke, who had a reputation for solving problems permanently. Gaines called out, Cutter. Miss Everly, you are both wanted for theft and conspiracy. Come out with your hands up, and no one gets hurt. Hollis did not answer. Nora looked at him. What do we do? Hollis kept his eyes on the window. We wait. They will not rush us. Not in the dark. Not when they do not know how well we are armed. But come morning, they will try something. Nora set the rifle down and moved back to the table. Then, we use tonight to finish this. She spread out the documents, hers and Hollis's, side by side. Hollis joined her, and they worked by lantern light, tracing the connections. Webb's falsified loans, Gaines's enforcement, the territorial funds that disappeared and reappeared in private accounts. It was all there, a web of corruption that reached higher than either of them had guessed. Nora wrote quickly, drafting an article that laid it all out, names and dates and undeniable proof. When she finished, she looked at Hollis. If we can get this to the territorial marshal, it is over. Webb and Gaines both go down. Hollis studied the pages. The marshal is in Silver Creek. That is 2 days' ride. She met his eyes. Then one of us has to go. Tonight, while they are watching the cabin. Hollis shook his head. You are not going alone. She lifted her chin. And you are not going alone either. So we both stay. Or we both go. Choose. Hollis looked at her. This woman he had met only hours ago. This woman who had stolen documents and faced down a storm and refused to bend even when the whole territory was closing in. He thought about the years he had spent running, the years he had spent alone, convinced that trusting anyone was a mistake. And he realized He was tired of running. He was tired of being alone. He reached out and took her hand. We both go. Together. She squeezed his fingers. Together. They slipped out the back window an hour before dawn, leaving the lantern burning and the barred door in place to make it look like they were still inside. Hollis led the way through the snow, moving low and fast, heading for the tree line. Behind them, the cabin sat silent. Ahead, the horizon was just beginning to pale. They reached the horses they had hidden in the barn and mounted quietly. Nora looked back once. The riders were still circling, waiting for daylight. She turned forward and kicked her horse into motion. Hollis rode beside her, and they disappeared into the gray light, racing toward Silver Creek. The ride was brutal. The cold cut through their coats, and the horses labored through drifts that came up to their bellies. But they did not stop. Hollis navigated by instinct, following trails he barely remembered, cutting across frozen creeks and through stands of pine that offered brief shelter from the wind. Nora kept pace, her face numb, her hands aching. But she did not complain. She just rode. And Hollis found himself watching her, marveling at her. This woman who should have broken a dozen times already but kept going. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, she slid down from the saddle and nearly fell. Hollis caught her, his hands on her arms, holding her steady. "You all right?" She nodded, but her teeth were chattering. He pulled her close, wrapping his coat around them both, sharing warmth. She leaned into him, and for a moment, they just stood there, breathing together. Then she pulled back, looked up at him, and said quietly, "Thank you for not leaving me behind." Hollis touched her face, his thumb brushing her cold cheek. "I am not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." The moment stretched, fragile and real. Nora felt something crack open inside her, something she had kept locked away since her father's rejection, since the day she learned that love could be weaponized. She had told herself she did not need anyone, that independence was safer than trust. But standing here, in Hollis Cutter's arms, she realized she had been wrong. She needed this. She needed him. And that terrified her more than Webb or Gaines or any hired gun. She stepped back, breaking the contact. "We should keep moving." Hollis let her go, but his eyes stayed on her, and she knew he had felt it too, that shift, that opening. They mounted again and rode on, the silence between them heavy with things unsaid. They reached Silver Creek at midday, riding straight to the marshal's office. Marshal Ezra Tate was a gray-haired man with a face carved from hard experience. He listened to their story, read the documents, and then leaned back in his chair. "This is enough to bring charges, but it is also enough to get you both killed. Webb has friends, powerful friends. You sure you want to see this through?" Nora did not hesitate. "Yes." Hollis nodded. "We are sure." Tate studied them both, then stood. "All right. I will ride back with you. We will arrest Webb and Gaines together. But you two stay close. This is not over until they are in irons." They rode back toward Blue Mesa with Tate and 4 deputies, a show of force that made Nora feel safer than she had in days. But as they crested the ridge overlooking the town, Hollis pulled up short. Smoke, rising from the center of town, thick and black. Nora felt her stomach drop. The Gazette. They spurred their horses forward, racing down into Blue Mesa, The newspaper office was engulfed, flames roaring through the roof. Townspeople gathered in a helpless ring. Nora dismounted and ran forward, but Hollis caught her. "It is gone. There is nothing you can do." She fought against his grip, her eyes burning. "Everything I built, everything I had, it is all gone." He turned her to face him. "No, you still have the story. You still have the proof. We will rebuild. I promise you, we will rebuild." She collapsed against him, and he held her while the Gazette burned. Marshal Tate arrested Carson Webb and Deputy Gaines that afternoon, pulling them out of the bank in front of half the town. Webb protested, threatened, called in favors. But Tate was unmoved. "The charges are theft, fraud, arson, and conspiracy. You are both going to stand trial." Gaines went quietly, his face pale. Webb fought until the irons went on, and even then, he glared at Nora with a hatred that made her skin crawl. "This is not over," he hissed. "You have no idea what you have started." Tate shoved him toward the wagon. "Save it for the judge." That night, the town held an impromptu gathering at the church, a mix of relief and celebration. The Hargroves came, tears in their eyes, to thank Nora for saving their ranch. Other families followed. People who had been too afraid to speak up, who had lost homes and land to Webb's schemes. Nora stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed, and Hollis stayed close, his hand on her back, grounding her. Someone struck up a fiddle, and the mood shifted, becoming lighter. People began to dance, clapping and laughing, the tension of the past days breaking like a fever. A woman Nora did not know took her hands. "Come on, miss. You earned this." Nora let herself be pulled into the circle, and then Hollis was there, offering his hand. "May I?" She took his hand, and they moved together, the music fast and bright. She was not a graceful dancer, and neither was he, but it did not matter. They laughed, stumbling over each other's feet, and the sound felt like release. When the song ended, they were breathless, standing close, the noise of the crowd fading around them. Hollis looked down at her, and his expression shifted, becoming serious. "Nora, I need to tell you something." She waited, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. He took a breath. "I spent a long time thinking I did not deserve a second chance, that I had made too many mistakes, hurt too many people. But you made me think maybe I was wrong. Maybe we both get to start over." She felt tears prick her eyes. "Hollis, He touched her face. "Let me finish. I know we just met. I know this is fast. But I do not want to lose you. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." She opened her mouth to answer, and that was when the church door slammed open. Rourke stood in the doorway, gun drawn, his face twisted with fury. "Where is she? Where is the woman who destroyed everything?" The crowd scattered, people diving for cover. Hollis shoved Nora behind him and reached for his revolver, but Rourke was faster. He fired, and the shot went wide, splintering the wall behind them. Hollis returned fire, and Rourke ducked behind a pew. Nora pulled the small pistol she had taken from the ranch and fired twice, forcing Rourke to move. He came up shooting, and Hollis tackled Nora to the floor as bullets tore through the space where she had been standing. Marshal Tate and his deputies burst through the side door. guns blazing. Rourke turned to run, and Tate shot him in the leg. He went down hard, cursing, and the deputies swarmed him. Tate stood over him, shaking his head. Should have stayed bought, Rourke. Hollis pulled Nora to her feet, checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? She shook her head, but she was trembling. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. It is over. It is really over. She buried her face in his shoulder and let the fear pour out of her. Around them, the townspeople slowly emerged, shaken but safe. Tate hauled Rourke to his feet and dragged him outside. The music did not start again, but the mood shifted, becoming something quieter, more solemn. People came up to Nora and Hollis, thanking them, offering support, promising help to rebuild the Gazette. Hollis kept his arm around Nora, and she leaned into him, grateful beyond words. They walked back to Bluebird Ranch that night under a sky full of stars. The cold was still brutal, but the wind had died, and the silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. Nora stopped halfway, looking up at the sky. I thought I had lost everything. My paper, my reputation, my chance to make a difference. Hollis turned to face her. You did not lose anything. You won. You took down the men who were destroying this town. You saved families. You saved yourself. She looked at him, and her voice broke. I saved myself because you helped me. I could not have done this alone. He stepped closer. You are not alone. Not anymore. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers cold against his beard. I spent so long trying to prove I did not need anyone, trying to show my father that I could be enough on my own. But I was wrong. I do need people. I need you. Hollis covered her hand with his. Your father was a fool for letting you go. And I am not making that mistake. I am staying, if you will have me. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her, bright and unguarded. Yes, I will have you. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. She kissed him back, pouring everything into it, all the fear and relief and hope she had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and the stars seemed brighter. Hollis rested his forehead against hers. So what now? She laughed. Now we rebuild. The Gazette, the ranch, everything. Hollis grinned. Together. She nodded. Together. They spent the winter rebuilding. The town rallied, donating lumber and labor to construct a new Gazette office, bigger than the old one. Hollis moved freight contracts to support the ranch, and Nora ran stories that held the territory accountable, shining light into every dark corner Webb and Gaines had tried to hide. The Hargroves kept their land, and other families followed. Foreclosures overturned, debts forgiven. Blue Mesa began to breathe again, and through it all, Nora and Hollis worked side by side, their partnership deepening into something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Spring came early, melting the snow and turning the plains green. Nora stood in the doorway of the new Gazette office, watching Hollis load supplies into a wagon. He caught her watching and smiled, that slow, dangerous smile that still made her pulse kick. What? She shook her head. Nothing. Just thinking. About what? She walked toward him, taking his hand. About how much has changed. About how scared I was. About how glad I am that I ran into that storm shelter. He pulled her close. Best mistake you ever made. She laughed. Best mistake we both made. Marshall Tate came through town in April with news. Webb and Gaines had been sentenced to 20 years each, their assets seized and distributed to the families they had defrauded. The territorial governor had commended Nora and Hollis personally, and there was talk of new protections for homesteaders, new oversight for banks. Tate shook Hollis's hand and tipped his hat to Nora. You two did good. Real good. Nora smiled. We just told the truth. Tate nodded. That is all it takes. Most of the time. That summer, Hollis asked Nora to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of Bluebird Ranch at sunset, watching the sky turn gold and pink. He did not have a ring. He just took her hand and said, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Marry me. She did not hesitate. Yes, they were married in the same church where Rourke had tried to kill them, and half the town came to witness. Nora wore a simple white dress, and Hollis wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable and endearing. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Hollis kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, and the congregation erupted in cheers. They honeymooned at the ranch, spending lazy days fixing fences and planting a garden and learning the rhythms of married life. Nora set up a small printing press in the barn so she could work from home, and Hollis expanded his freight business, hiring men who needed second chances the way he had. They talked late into the night, sharing stories they had never told anyone else, confessing fears and dreams and the wounds they still carried. And slowly, carefully, they healed each other. One evening in late fall, Nora stood at the window of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the plains. Hollis came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? She leaned back against him. About how far we have come, about how scared I was that day in the storm shelter, about how I thought I would have to fight alone forever. He kissed the top of her head. You are not alone. You will never be alone again. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. I know, and I am not afraid anymore. He smiled. Good, because I have a secret. She raised an eyebrow. What kind of secret? He took her hand and placed it on her stomach. The kind that changes everything. Nora stared at him, her mind racing. Are you saying? He nodded. I think so. You have been tired, and you have not been able to stand the smell of coffee for a week. She felt tears well up, joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. Hollis, He cupped her face. We are going to be parents, and we are going to be great at it, because we know what not to do. She laughed through her tears. You are right. We do. He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. We are going to be fine. Better than fine. She nodded, believing him. We are going to be happy. They were. Through the hard winters and the long summers, through droughts and good harvests, through the challenges of raising a daughter and then a son, Nora and Hollis built a life that was rooted in trust and honesty, and the kind of love that only grows stronger with time. The Gazette thrived under Nora's leadership, and Hollis's freight business became the most reliable in the territory. Bluebird Ranch became a place where people came when they needed help, a sanctuary for those who had nowhere else to go. And every night, no matter how hard the day had been, Nora and Hollis sat together on the porch and watched the sun set, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the courage that had kept them fighting. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Hollis always grinned and said, "Your mother ran into a storm shelter with a dangerous man." And Nora always added, "And that dangerous man turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." The children would roll their eyes, but they knew the story by heart. They knew about the stolen papers and the corrupt banker and the shootout in the church. They knew about courage and forgiveness and the power of telling the truth. And they knew, beyond any doubt, that their parents loved each other with a fierceness that nothing could break. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was still, Nora and Hollis would sit by the fire, hands clasped, and remember. Remember the fear. Remember the fight. Remember the moment they chose each other, over and over again, until that choice became as natural as breathing, and they would look at each other and smile, knowing that they had found what so many people search for their whole lives and never find. They had found home, not a place, a person, and that made all the difference.